The first time I heard the crash, I honestly thought a tree had come through my roof, but when I stepped outside barefoot in the cold, still half asleep, I saw something worse than a fallen tree. I saw my mother's old dreams scattered across my front yard in twisted chrome, broken glass, and oil shining under the streetlight. And the worst part was, before anyone said a word, before the police came, before my neighbor even ran across the lawn yelling my name, I already knew who had done it. I knew because only one man in that neighborhood hated that car enough to destroy it, and only one man smiled at me the week before and said, "Caleb, sooner or later that ugly thing is going to disappear." But I should probably back up, because this did not start with a crash. It started with a promise I made beside a hospital bed. The kind of promise you make when you are young enough to believe grief can be turned into fuel if you just work hard enough. My mom, Lorraine Morgan, raised me by herself in a 2-bedroom rental outside Knoxville, Tennessee, a little place with thin walls, bad plumbing, and a landlord who always acted like fixing the heater was some kind of personal favor. She worked at a diner in the mornings and cleaned offices at night, and even when she was exhausted, she used to drive me through the older neighborhoods after school, just to look at houses, not the fancy ones, not the mansion kind, but the quiet ones with porches and oak trees and garages with oil stains in the driveway. She would point at them like they were museums and say, "One day, honey, we're going to have a place where nobody can tell us to leave. Nobody can raise the rent. Nobody can raise the rent. Nobody can knock on the door and act like we're temporary." I did not understand how heavy that dream was until she got sick. Cancer does this awful thing where it makes time feel slippery. One month you are arguing about coupons at the grocery store. The next month you are learning how to fold blankets around someone whose hands are suddenly too thin. And near the end, she would ask me about normal things just to pretend life was still normal. Whether I had changed the oil in my truck, whether I was eating enough, whether I still had that ridiculous dream of fixing up old muscle cars. I told her I did, and she smiled, even though smiling hurt by then, and said, "When you get your house, make sure it has a garage, a real one, not one of those little closets they call a garage now." So after she passed, I worked like a man trying to outrun silence. I took every overtime shift I could get at the logistics warehouse, flipped small engines on weekends, repaired cars for people from work, skipped vacations, skipped dates, skipped anything that cost more than gas money. And when I finally bought my house in a little subdivision called Briar Glen, I sat in the empty living room on move-in day with a gas station sandwich in my hand and cried so hard I scared myself. It was not a big house, but it had a yard, a detached garage, and a cracked concrete driveway that felt to me like marble. For the first year, I was almost stupidly happy. The neighbors were mostly older folks, retired teachers, postal workers, a widower named Dennis who grew tomatoes like he was competing with God, people who waved because they meant it, not because a neighborhood newsletter told them to. And in that garage, little by little, I built the life I had been picturing since I was a kid. The crown jewel was a 1970 Plymouth Roadrunner, B5 blue, black hood stripes, 383 under the hood, rough when I found it. Almost embarrassing if I am being honest, but I bought it from a man whose barn smelled like hay, gasoline, and mouse nests, and I hauled it home like I had rescued something alive. My mom had never owned that car, but it became tied to her in my head because every bolt I turned felt like a conversation with her. I would be under the hood at midnight, knuckles bleeding, radio playing low, and I would catch myself saying, "What do you think, Mom?" Like she was sitting on an overturned bucket with a cup of coffee, making fun of me for dropping the wrench again. It took me 4 years to bring that car back. 4 years of sanding, saving, learning, messing up, fixing what I messed up. And the first time it started clean, that engine rumbling through the garage walls, I stood there laughing like an idiot with tears running down my face. That car was not just metal to me. It was proof that ruined things could come back. Then Briar Glen changed. A developer bought the empty land past the creek and put up 24 newer houses, taller, cleaner, all grey siding and black shutters, the kind of houses that looked like they were designed by a committee that hates fingerprints. New families moved in, and some of them were fine, truly, but a few brought this strange obsession with image, as if a neighborhood was not a place where people lived but a brochure everyone had to maintain. That was when the Briar Glen Community Association went from a sleepy little group that organized potlucks to something with bylaws, fines, complaint forms, and a monthly meeting where grown adults argued about mailbox colors like national security depended on it. I had never joined. My deed was older than the association, and my closing paperwork was very clear that membership was voluntary for my lot. But that did not stop their new president, Victor Klein, from acting like my front porch was part of his personal kingdom. Victor was one of those men who wore golf shirts tucked into jeans and spoke in that slow, sweet voice people use when they are about to insult you and wanted to sound like advice. He sold insurance, flipped properties on the side, and had a talent for making every conversation feel like a performance. The first time he came by, he stood at the edge of my driveway staring into my garage like he was inspecting a crime scene. "Nice collection," he said, though his face said the opposite, and I told him thanks, because back then I still believed politeness could keep people normal. He said, "You know, Caleb, Briar Glen is moving in a more polished direction. Buyers notice things, curb appeal matters," and I laughed because I thought he was joking. He was not. Over the next few months, letters started showing up. One said my grass was half an inch too tall near the fence. Another said my trash bins were visible from the street at 7:15 p.m. on a Thursday. Another said the primer grey fender leaning inside my open garage created an industrial atmosphere inconsistent with community standards. I called him and said, "Victor, I am not part of your association." He chuckled and said, "Maybe not on paper, but we all live here, and standards protect everyone." What he meant was, I protect what I like, and I punish what I do not. Things got worse after my garage filled up. I had 3 customer projects inside, plus my tools, plus the Roadrunner, and I needed space to finish a transmission job. So my neighbor, Owen Reeves, who lived 2 doors down and had the only common sense left on Maple Court, told me to put the Plymouth on the front pad for a few days. He parked his fishing boat in front of his place half the summer, and nobody cared, so I figured, sure, no big deal. I pulled the Roadrunner out, washed it, put a cover on it at night, and for a few days, every time I walked past the kitchen window, I smiled. Then Victor came over. He did not knock at first. He just stood on the sidewalk with his hands on his hips, looking at my car like it had personally offended his bloodline. I opened the door and said, "Can I help you?" He gave me that fake little neighborhood president smile and said, "Caleb, we have received several concerns." I looked up and down the empty street and said, "From who, the squirrels?" His smile twitched. He said the vehicle was visually disruptive, that it suggested neglect, that it might attract the wrong kind of attention. I said, "It attracts middle-aged men who want to talk carburetors, Victor. That is about as dangerous as it gets." He stepped closer then, lowering his voice like we were in some backroom negotiation, and said, "I'm asking you neighbor to neighbor, move it out of sight." And something about the way he said neighbor, like it was a title he could revoke, made my patience snap. I told him the car was on my property. It was registered, insured, running, and frankly worth more than his leased SUV. So unless he had a court order tucked in his khakis, he could get off my lawn. For a second, the mask dropped. His eyes went flat. Then he smiled again and said, "Careful, Caleb. Stubborn people usually confuse a warning with a conversation." I watched him walk away, and I remember thinking he was just another petty little man with a clipboard and too much free time. Annoying, sure, but harmless. That was the mistake, because a week later, after one more letter, 2 more complaints, and one very tense exchange at the association meeting where Victor told half the room I was dragging down property values, I found a handwritten note tucked under my wiper blade, no signature, just one sentence in block letters. "Move the car before someone moves it for you." I wish I could tell you I took that note seriously right away, but I did what a lot of people do when something feels too ridiculous to be real. I laughed at it, showed Owen, shook my head, and tucked it into the kitchen drawer with the other letters Victor had been sending like love notes from a very boring stalker. Owen did not laugh as much as I did. He stood in my driveway with his arms crossed, looking at the note, then looking down the street toward Victor Klein's house, that big white place on the corner with the perfect hedges and the floodlights that made it look like a dentist's office at night. He said, "Caleb, men like Victor do not threaten because they are angry. They threaten because they already decided they are right." That stuck with me more than I wanted it to. So the next morning, I moved the Roadrunner farther up onto the concrete pad, away from the curb, took photos from every angle, checked the locks on the garage, and told myself that was enough. And for a few days, nothing happened. Victor walked his dog past my house without looking at me. The letters stopped. The neighborhood group chat, which I had been added to against my will by a woman named Patty, who believed every community issue could be solved with cupcakes and passive aggression, went quiet about me. I thought maybe he had found some other target, maybe a bird feeder that was the wrong shade of cedar, or a porch flag that offended the spirit of resale value. Then came the Saturday cleanup event. Briard Glen had this annual thing where residents picked up trash along the creek, trimmed the common flower beds, drank bad coffee from folding tables, and pretended they were all friends. I usually avoided it, but Dennis from across the street asked if I could help him haul mulch because his hip was acting up, so I went. That is where Victor decided to make it public. He waited until there were maybe 20 people around, then walked over with a clipboard tucked under his arm and said, "Caleb, glad you decided to contribute to the neighborhood today." I said, "I live here, Victor. I contribute every time I pay property tax." A few people chuckled. He did not. He said, "Since we are talking about shared responsibility, I would like to address the ongoing vehicle storage issue at your property." Vehicle storage. That was how he said it, like the Plymouth was a pile of moldy mattresses. I could feel everyone looking at me, some curious, some uncomfortable, some enjoying it because people love drama as long as it is not parked in their own driveway. I said, "My car is not an issue." He said, "The association has standards." I said, "I am not in the association." He said, "Community standards apply morally, even when they do not apply contractually," which was such a Victor sentence that I almost applauded. Then he leaned in and said quietly enough that only Owen and I could hear him, "You keep pushing this, and you are going to regret it." Owen stepped between us before I could answer and said, "Are you threatening him in front of witnesses, Vic?" Victor straightened up, smiled for the crowd, and said, "Of course not, Owen. I'm encouraging cooperation." That was Victor's gift. He could put a knife on the table and call it a butter spreader. After that day, I stopped pretending this was funny. I bought 2 battery-powered security cameras and mounted one above the garage and one under the porch roof. I did not hide them. I wanted him to see them. I wanted him to know that if anything happened, I would have it. But this is where the story gets stupid in the way real life often does. The porch camera worked fine. The garage camera kept dropping connection because the old brick wall blocked the signal, and every time I meant to fix it properly, some other problem got in the way. A work emergency, a customer car, a migraine, life. And Victor apparently was watching closely enough to know that. The next 2 weeks felt like waiting for a storm that would not break. I kept the car covered at night. I parked my truck behind it when I could. I started waking up at every noise, which made me feel ridiculous because I was a grown man being bullied by an insurance salesman with a lawn obsession. But underneath the irritation was something older and softer, the fear that he would not just be damaging a car, he would be reaching into the only piece of my mother's dream I had managed to build with my own hands. People who have never loved an object like that do not understand it. They hear car and think transportation, they hear old car and think hobby. But when you spend years bringing something back from rust, when you sand every panel and save for every part, and bleed on every stubborn bolt, it stops being a thing you own and starts being a map of who you were when you were fixing it. That roadrunner had seen me broke, grieving, lonely, stubborn, hopeful. It had heard me talk to my dead mother more than any church pew ever did. So yes, when Victor called it an eyesore, it felt personal. And maybe that is why I did not move it, even after the note. Maybe part of me needed to prove he could not push me off my own land. The crash came on a Tuesday, just after 2 a.m. It was not one sound, but several, a metallic scream, a deep boom, glass popping like firecrackers, then the high, whining reverse beep of heavy equipment backing away. I shot out of bed so fast I slammed my shoulder into the doorframe. Outside, the air smelled like diesel and hot metal. My porch light flickered on, Owen's floodlight snapped across the street, and there it was. The Plymouth was folded sideways, the front end crushed nearly to the firewall, hood buckled, windshield gone, driver's side quarter panel peeled open like a cam. The cover was tangled in the wheels of a small yellow skid steer that was already rolling backward down the street with its lights off, moving too fast for something that heavy. I ran after it barefoot like an idiot, yelling, "Hey, hey!" But it turned at the end of Maple Court and disappeared toward the construction entrance behind the new houses. Owen came sprinting over in pajama pants and boots, holding a flashlight in one hand and a baseball bat in the other, which would have been funny if my chest had not felt like it was collapsing. He took one look at the car and said, "Jesus, Caleb, I could not speak. I just stood there with broken glass under my feet, staring at the engine bay where I had spent hundreds of nights. And for 1 second I was not 34 years old in Tennessee. I was 26 again in a hospital room, telling my mother I would get the house, I would get the garage, I would build something that lasted. Then the anger came in so hard it cleared my head. I told Owen. It was him. Owen did not ask who. He just said, "We need proof." I called the police. While we waited, I checked my cameras with shaking hands. The porch camera had caught part of the impact, but the angle was useless. Mostly glare and the corner of the skid steer. The garage camera had been offline since 11:48 p.m. I stared at the app until the numbers blurred. Of course it had failed on the one night I needed it. 2 officers arrived, took statements, looked at the damage, asked if I had enemies, and I laughed in a way that made both of them look at each other. I said, "How much time do you have?" I showed them the letters, the notes, the pictures, told them about Victor's threats, told them about the skid steer disappearing toward the construction entrance. One officer, younger guy, seemed sympathetic. The older one had the tired face of a man who had seen too many neighbor disputes turn into paperwork shaped like headaches. He said, "Without a clear plate number or footage showing the operator, it would be hard to prove." I said, "So a man can just destroy a car and walk away because he did it at night?" He said, "I am not saying that," but his face said, "Maybe." At 7 a.m. I walked to Victor's house. Owen came with me because he said he did not trust my hands, which was fair. Victor opened the door wearing a robe, hair perfect, like even sleep had to follow community standards. He looked at me and said, "Caleb, it is early." I said, "My car is destroyed." His eyebrows lifted, just enough. He said, "That is terrible." I asked where he was at 2 a.m. He blinked slowly and said, "Asleep, like normal people." Owen said, "Funny, someone used a skid steer from the construction road." Victor looked at him and said, "I do not operate construction equipment, Owen. I sell insurance." Then he looked back at me with that soft smile. And I swear to you, I saw the satisfaction under it. Not big, not obvious, just a little glimmer, like a porch light behind curtains. He said, "Maybe this is a lesson about leaving valuable things exposed." My ears started ringing. Owen put a hand on my chest before I could step forward. I said, "You did this." Victor's smile disappeared. He said, "Be very careful making accusations you cannot support." That sentence saved me from doing something stupid, because suddenly I understood exactly what he was counting on. He wanted me angry. He wanted me reckless. He wanted me to become the kind of person he had been describing to the neighborhood for months: unstable, hostile, bad for property values. So I stepped back, looked at him and said, "You better hope I do not support it." Then I went home and started making calls. Insurance. A lawyer my co-worker knew, the county equipment rental yards, the developer's site manager. Every call led to another maybe, another form, another person saying they were sorry but could not release information. By noon, the association board had sent a message reminding residents that speculation helps no one and that the community should avoid inflammatory accusations. Victor wrote it. I knew he wrote it because it used the word inflammatory twice. For the first time since the crash, I felt something colder than anger. I felt embarrassed, not because of the car, but because I had let this man make me look powerless in my own home. Then Owen knocked on my door, holding a thumb drive and wearing the strangest expression I'd ever seen on his face, half grim, half delighted. He said, "You remember how my wife got me that ridiculous dash camera after I'd backed into the church mailbox?" I said, "Yes." He held up the drive. "Turns out," he said, "ridiculous things sometimes see in the dark." I took that thumb drive from Owen like it was evidence in a murder trial, which in a way it was, because something in me had died when I saw that car folded up under the streetlight. And if that little camera had caught what I thought it caught, then Victor Klein had finally made the one mistake arrogant people always make. He assumed everybody else was as blind as he needed them to be. We plugged it into my laptop at the kitchen table, both of us leaning over the screen in silence. And at first it was just normal overnight footage. Owen's driveway, a sleepy street, bugs flashing in the infrared, a raccoon waddling along the curb like he owned the place. Then at 2007 a.m., headlights appeared at the far end of Maple Court, low and ugly, not car headlights, work lights, and a yellow skid steer rolled into frame with its bucket raised just enough to clear the road. The video was grainy, but it was clear enough. Clear enough to show the machine turning toward my house. Clear enough to show it lining up with the Plymouth. Clear enough to show it slamming forward, bucket first into the front quarter panel with a force that made even the camera shake from 2 houses away. Owen muttered something under his breath. I could not. Then the skid steer backed up, adjusted, hit it again, harder, shoving the car sideways across the concrete pad like it was a toy, and when the operator turned, just for a second, the porch light caught the side of his face through the cab. It was not perfect, not courtroom portrait perfect, but I knew that face. The tight jaw, the neat hair, the smug little tilt of the head. Victor, and then came the gift wrapped in stupidity. The machine turned wide in Owen's driveway to leave, and the rear plate, muddy but readable, passed straight in front of the dash camera. Owen paused the video and looked at me. I looked at him. For the first time in almost 12 hours, I smiled. Not a happy smile, not exactly. More like the kind of smile you get when the universe finally hands you a receipt. We copied the file twice, uploaded it to cloud storage, sent 1 copy to my lawyer, and then called the police officer who had taken the report. Suddenly, everybody's tone changed. The older officer, who had looked tired the night before, sounded a lot more awake when I said we had footage, a plate number, and a visible operator. By that afternoon, the skid steer had been traced to a rental company outside town, rented under the name of one of Victor's property LLCs, the same little company he used for his house-flipping projects. Victor tried his first escape route immediately. He claimed one of his subcontractors must have taken the machine without permission. Then the rental place produced the pickup form with his signature, so he tried his second escape route. He said the machine had been stolen. Then the rental place produced security footage of him personally driving it off the lot the evening before. So he tried his third escape route, the one cowards love most. He said he had been under emotional stress, that I had provoked the entire situation, that my refusal to respect neighborhood standards had created a hostile environment. My lawyer read that part of his statement over the phone and actually laughed, not a polite laugh either, the kind of laugh that says, "Please keep talking, this helps us." The criminal side moved slower than I wanted, because the law always feels slow when you are the one standing in the wreckage. But the civil case moved with a kind of steady inevitability that gave me something to hold on to. The car was appraised not just as an old vehicle, but as a restored classic, with documented parts, labor, photographs, receipts, and market value. And because Victor had acted intentionally, my lawyer went after him for the full damage, attorney fees, emotional distress, and punitive damages. That phrase, punitive damages, sounded fancy until my lawyer explained it in plain English. It means the court is allowed to make the price hurt enough that a rich bully cannot treat destruction like a parking ticket. The neighborhood, meanwhile, split right down the middle. Some people apologized. Dennis brought over a casserole even though it was mostly noodles and guilt. Hattie from the group chat sent me a message saying she never agreed with Victor's tone, which was funny because she had liked every single one of his posts. A few others acted like I had started a war by defending myself. One guy from the news section told me, "Well, you have to admit, the car did create tension." I asked him if he thought tension was usually solved with construction equipment, and he suddenly remembered he had somewhere else to be. Victor resigned as association president 3 days before the hearing, calling it a temporary step back to protect his family from negativity, which was the most Victor way possible to say, "I got caught." At the hearing, he wore a navy suit and looked smaller than I expected. That surprised me. In my mind, he had become this giant shadow over my house, but sitting at that table, avoiding my eyes, he was just a petty man with expensive shoes and a bad lawyer. The Dashcam video played on a screen at the front of the room. Nobody talked while it played, not when the machine turned in, not when it hit the car, not when it backed up and hit it again. The judge watched the whole thing, then looked at Victor over her glasses and said, "Mr. Klein, this was not a misunderstanding. This was not a community dispute. This was deliberate destruction of another person's property." Victor tried to speak, but she lifted one hand and he stopped. I will remember that forever, not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet. After months of him talking over people, threatening people, dressing up cruelty as leadership, one raised hand shut him down. The judgment came in higher than I expected. High enough to cover the car, the legal costs, and a punishment that made Victor's face go pale. His insurance did not save him because intentional acts are a funny thing. Apparently companies do not enjoy paying for crimes committed by men who think bylaws make them kings. Within 2 months, his house was listed. Within 3, he was gone. No goodbye, no speech, no final newsletter about community values. Just a moving truck in the driveway at sunrise and Victor standing on the lawn in the same tucked-in golf shirt, looking at the street like it had betrayed him. Owen and I watched from my porch with coffee. I know that sounds petty. It was. I enjoyed every sip. The Roadrunner could not be saved, not fully. I kept the hood emblem, the steering wheel, the rearview mirror, and a few pieces from the engine bay that survived like stubborn little bones. For a while I thought I would never build another car, because every time I walked into the garage, the empty space felt too loud. Then one Saturday, Owen dragged me 3 counties over to look at a 1971 Satellite sitting behind a closed feed store, sun-faded, ugly, missing trim, but solid where it counted. I stood there looking at it, trying not to care, and then the owner turned the key and that old engine coughed once, twice, then caught, rough but alive. I swear I heard my mother laugh, so I bought it. I used part of the settlement to rebuild it, not to replace the Roadrunner, because you cannot replace something that carried that much grief and love, but to prove that Victor had only destroyed metal, not the promise behind it. The first night I drove the finished car back into Bribeglen, the sun was dropping behind the trees, warm gold across the lawns, and half the neighborhood came outside because old engines do not ask permission to be heard. Owen stood at the curb grinning. Dennis lifted one hand from his porch. Even Patty waved, though I am pretty sure she still hated the noise. I parked in the driveway right out front, shut the engine off, and for a second everything was still. Then I looked at the garage, the house, the porch, the yard my mother never got to see, and I finally understood something. Home is not peaceful because nobody challenges you. Home is peaceful when the people who try to take it from you learn they cannot. So here is what I want to know, because people still argue about this in my old neighborhood group chat like it is a Supreme Court case. Was I wrong for refusing to move the car when I knew it was making things worse? Or was Victor the only one responsible the moment he decided his version of a perfect neighborhood mattered more than another man's property, memories, and rights? Drop your honest take in the comments, because I really want to know where you draw the line between keeping peace with neighbors and standing your ground, and if you have ever dealt with an HOA tyrant, a power-hungry neighbor, or someone who thought a little authority made them untouchable. Share your story too, because trust me, the quietest streets can hide the ugliest fights, and sometimes the only thing louder than an old engine is the sound of a bully finally paying for what he did.